What if I told you that your story has the power to make our world a better place? Would you believe me? Would it make you want to share your story more? Well, my name is Matt Story, so I may be biased, but join me as I sit with leaders that are doing just that, sharing their stories of unique lived experiences that they've turned into superpowers that they now use to make a positive impact on our world. Welcome to another episode of What's Your Story. I'm excited to share another amazing leader story with you. But before I jump in, I wanted to talk about something that has actually come up in conversations I've been having with, I guess, what are two sides of the ecosystem between creators and brands. You know, some of my marketing friends have been asking, and we've been talking about like how to better work with creators and what can we do to both position our brands for success, but also to be a better partner to the creators that are out there that are making amazing content. And then on the other side of the equation, I've been having conversations with my friends that are creators. And they've been asking me, what are the things they can do to either put themselves in a position to get more brand deals, more brand partnerships, or to have more long-term partnerships has also been one of the things they've really been looking for. Because I think where we are in the space now is that both sides are really starting to fill each other out. And I think a lot of times there's not a clear path forward of how to make the partnership work for both the creator, but also for the brand. And so I thought I'd share just a few things that have come up in those conversations that might be helpful if you find yourself sitting on either sides of that equation. So first and foremost, I think like any relationship or any partnership, it has to be built on one, trust, but also two, equitable value exchange. I think a lot of times we can go into these thinking that we know what the other side really wants to get out of the relationship or out of the partnership. But if we actually stopped and asked, we might be surprised what we actually hear. Many times creators aren't just looking for a payday. They're not just looking for a check. They bring more than just a community of engaged followers to you as a brand marketer. They bring expertise, know-how, knowledge that you can also tap into and understand, oh, wow, I didn't realize that creator could actually help us in different areas besides just bringing a following. And then simultaneously, a lot of times, you know, brands are thought of as checks, and that's not what we as marketers can only bring to the table. And I think really thinking about how that brand can lend either its brand attributes or other things that the brand may have access to, whether it's technology, resources, solutions that creator didn't realize that they could tap into on the brand side. So I think really focusing in on how do you get to that equitable value exchange and ensuring that each party is taking away something that's actually helping them along the path that they're really trying to go. I think the second thing too is really beginning with the end in mind. I think there are brands, there are creators that are looking for kind of short-term relationships or short-term engagements that really are able to help them achieve what that short-term goal may be. But as I see more and more of these relationships get built, there really is an opportunity to build long-standing or more longer-term opportunities to work together. One, as a community member that's following either a brand or following a creator, you're looking for those relationships that actually are true and authentic. And nothing speaks to more of a true, authentic relationship is one that lasts over time. And secondarily, there's a learning curve anytime you're engaging with a new brand or you're engaging with a creator. And if you're able to take advantage of going through that learning curve once to be able to come back for a second round, a third round, a fourth round, and so on and so forth, it's actually more efficient use of time, energy, and resources as well. And then I think just lastly, really thinking about how is this space overall evolving and how can you actually tap into the things that are changing and the ebbs and flows. You know, depending on, you know, when you're listening to this, there's always going to be questions on which platform should I be on, which platform should I be putting content out. And as those things change, being able to tap into both a marketer or a creator that has that experience and can actually give you the know-how of what and how they should be approaching the various channels, I think is another key benefit in these relationships that are being established. But yeah, that's just something that's been coming up in conversations that I've been having. And, you know, I welcome any thoughts that all of you have out there on how you're thinking about approaching brands if you're a creator, or if you're a marketer, how you think about approaching creators. My guest on the pod this week is a dreamer, believer, husband, father, author, and podcast host. So you know I'm looking forward to hearing more about his story. So please welcome Dane C. Hawkins to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Matt. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. and talk to you
Yeah.
today.
Well, I appreciate you jumping on the mic, my brother. And I just really look forward to getting into your journey. But before we do that, I'm hoping you could take us back and maybe give us a glimpse into what little Dane may have been like.
Uh, well, it's a pretty interesting story at times. Born in Washington, D.C. Uh, in '79, dating myself, aging myself. But so I grew up partially in DC through the 80s, which for a lot of our Black communities was a very interesting time, especially in Southeast DC. And then as I got to my teenage years in high school, my mother actually went from DC to Maryland. And then when I was a freshman in high school, we relocated to North Carolina
Mm,
to a place called Hickory, North Carolina. So my childhood and developmental years was very different in that I spent a lot of it in a big city.
mhm,
And then I went to traditional small town USA in the South.
mhm,
So the dynamics were completely different. I was in an environment that was 85, 90% African American Black to a place that was 85, 90% Southern rural white. So, so my background made me have to learn how to adapt a lot. So
mhm,
in doing so, especially with a single mother up until we relocated to North Carolina, I had to be the oldest child, helping with the other kids, helping to be responsible, learning how to do things beyond my age, just to make
mhm,
sure I had the opportunity to help my mother. And then when we relocated to North Carolina, now I had a stepfather. Totally different environment, totally different standard of living. So
mhm.
it's very, very interesting, unique changes throughout my childhood.
Yeah, when we talked earlier, I think we both have a kind of those pivotal moments of going from kind of an environment. I grew up in Detroit city surrounded by people that look like you
Yeah.
into a completely different one. I'm curious, like either that shift or just growing up, how did that impact how you thought about what you wanted to be when you grew up?
So I was actually a bit of a reclusive child because of all of the moving around, parents separating and us moving out of DC into Maryland, moving around quite a bit. I found myself relying more on entertaining myself or finding my enjoyment within myself. I was a big comic book reader, probably at about the age of 5. So one of the things my biological father actually introduced to me and I held on to even when he wasn't around. So to this day, I still read comic books. And when I moved to North Carolina at 14, I started to collect them. It
Mm,
was less of a, oh, mommy, can you buy me that Spider-Man book? To, okay, I'm 14. They give me money and drop me off at the mall. I go to the comic book shop and I go buy the plastic and put it in and
mhm,
keep these things now.
mhm,
So at a younger age, I was very introverted, somewhat reclusive. Of course, as most introverts, one on one was my thing. So I
mm,
had friends, but it was just like that one person that I could feel comfortable confiding in, things like that. And then, as I got older and um, became more comfortable with who I am, then I sort of broke out of my shell.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm curious, like how did your community guide what was possible, especially going from the big city to more of a small town? Like what did you think would be the roadmap you would take, or like how did you think about, oh, I could go do this or I could go do that, or maybe some of that came from the comic books and like kind of giving
So,
you those goals and dreams.
so I had a very independent schoolwork type of life my entire childhood. I was a kid that my mother didn't have to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, everyone sort of looked at my grades and were like, "Oh, he's great at math.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he should do." On the flip side, for me, um, the TV show A Different World is probably my favorite TV show of all time. So Dwayne Wayne was like who I thought I could be.
Mm. Mm.
because I was a middle school kid that was great at math
Yep.
from a city, and he went from Brooklyn to Virginia in the South in
Yeah.
college. So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I could be like that. I'm great at math. I could get a perfect score on my math SATs as he did in the show. So that was those images that were put forth by a show like that sort of helped me develop where I wanted to go, and sort of led me to think, oh, I could be an engineer one day.
Mm.
And sharing that idea with like my mom, then she told the whole world my baby's going to be an engineer one day. so then the community sort of backed it in the sense that nobody doubted it.
Mm.
Everyone was like, well, my family nickname was Dano, so
Okay.
everybody said, well, Dano can do anything if he
Yeah.
wants to do it.
Yeah.
So that sense, they nurtured what the dream I made for myself.
Wow.
Now, at that age in middle school, your dreams can change left or right. So what happened in this case for me is the dream became what everybody grabbed onto, because engineering is such a highly viewed career. So even if I did change my mind, I think everybody
Mm.
was then like, no, you're going to be an engineer. so it never, even if I had doubts about it as I got older and got closer to college age, there was that sense of, well, maybe I just don't like this type of engineering and I need to find another type of engineering.
So, following down that path of engineering, you attended North Carolina A&T. Obviously, I'm sure some of the different world probably influenced that as well, but you got your undergrad and your master's there. So, what did you take away from actually almost being in the shoes of that vision you had created and actually going through living that life?
So it is funny for me looking in hindsight. There are so many things that me as a young man going through high school, trying to determine what I wanted, said that I would love to have. And even in college, once I got to A&T and started to develop that community, um, that I said I wanted for my career. And I feel like A&T helped me attain all of those things s- simply just by being a true community. Like
Mm.
my, I have friends that I've known longer than A&T, but the friends that I've grasped to and clung to that feel like those lifelong friends, they're all from A&T,
Yeah.
save maybe one or two people.
Yeah.
But the ones I speak to regularly, they're all from A&T, and that it was not just a source of education and a community that I developed in college, but it became family. And I don't know if many people that went to North Carolina A&T, which is now the largest HBCU in the U.S., but people tell us that we're like a fraternity without
Mm-hmm.
actually being in a
Mm-hmm.
fraternity.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have our own, calls that we yell out just for the
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
So we are a very close knit community. I can't walk anywhere with A&T paraphernalia on without somebody saying Aggie pride.
Yeah.
Um, it's just it gives you a feeling of belonging. And for somebody that moved around so much as a young kid and had to lose friends and make new friends, and that was something that was very important to me.
Mm.
And I think it was motivational in the sense that, okay, everyone here looks like me and everyone here is trying to attain this level of success, and we all love each other because we're a part of this.
Yeah.
So that is inspiring and motivational for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. That definitely, that's consistent in the folks I've talked to that, well, I think a little bit of that comes to every college
Yeah.
financial degree, but I think it's like a
Yeah.
different level when you go to HBCU, and a different level at a few of
Yes.
the HBCUs that kind of
Yes,
have
I agree.
that footprint in the professional world where you have those intersections. And it could be somebody that you went to school with, it could be somebody who went to school 10 years after you, but there's still
Right.
that tied connection, if you will. But
Yeah. And when I got my first job at Lockheed Martin, and I started probably my second position in the company, and it was all new people, and everyone kept saying, "Do you know? Do you know? Do you know?" Because it was so many A&T people that worked
yeah,
at the company.
exactly. Exactly. So I want to jump into your journey, and you've had a successful career in engineering. So you did go and do the engineering thing,
Yes.
and we could probably spend an entire pod talking about that. But I actually want to talk about your other passion in writing. And I'm just curious, like, how have you navigated having a passion for something that actually sits outside of your day to day? And as I started with, you are an author, and we're going to get into the journey there. But I'm just curious from a, I hate the word balance, because I don't think there is truly balance in life. I think there's
Right.
integration. But I'm just curious, as someone that, you're a multi hyphen, you're not just an engineer, you're an author, you're, as you said, as I said, a father, a husband, all these other
Right.
things. Like, how do you navigate that in life today?
Um, yeah, that word balance is a funny thing because there is no true balance. It's more prioritization
Hmm.
to me. Um, I actually put writing on the back burner for quite some time because it felt more like a hobby when I started it.
Hmm.
I started writing in college, actually, while I was studying for engineering. I was on pace to have a career in the analytical world using my analytical brain. But as I mentioned, I had always read comic books, so I'd always had a huge imagination.
Hmm.
So my creative side was there; it just was untapped, and I didn't know how to develop or use it when
Hmm.
I first got to college. Um, and uh, English classes in college were much different than the English classes in grade school.
Yeah.
I was a C student in English in grade school because it was all grammar and Shakespeare and stuff that didn't interest me.
Yeah.
I, once I learned how to write, I was like, okay, I'll just do whatever I have to do. I get to college and they started introducing us to creative writing. And that just made my mind explode. And for the first time in my life, I'm getting straight A's in English.
Hmm.
And it just became something that I enjoyed doing, that even unexpectedly for myself. And I found myself turning it into like this hobby that I took outside of the class, that I didn't even share with anyone. And, at the time I'm 19, 20 years old. So of course the first thing I started writing was rhymes. but eventually, those rhymes turned into poems and my boys would catch me with like, what is this little slip of paper? Or what do you write? What are you over there in the corner writing? And so eventually I started sharing and telling them what I was doing. And they'd be like, oh, okay, because we're
Yeah.
all studying to be engineers.
Yeah.
So why are you writing lyrics over there?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember the MySpace days,
Yeah.
but I used to like put my little poem on the
Yeah.
MySpace page where you could put your stuff. And I didn't do a lot of it because I had like 12 friends back then, so I was never a huge social media person.
Yeah.
But it just made me enjoy it more. The response from people, my sister, my best friend, my cousin,
Yeah.
that made me enjoy it. And then in sharing it with people that I dated, they were like, "Well, you should try writing this," or my homeboy was like, "Well, have you ever thought about writing this? Because everybody wants to be a rapper, but you should write this."
Yeah.
And that developed into me trying to create my own comic book characters and just writing my own little notebook of stuff.
Mm.
And then in grad school, I working full time, grad school full time, I figured out time to have for basketball and to start this novel.
Mm.
And the novel was really just the passion and things that I had in me that I just wanted to get out. I wanted to write a book that I would like to read.
Mhm.
And it turned into a story about young black men in college.
Mm.
Um, and I wrote about 65 pages before I graduated from grad school. And then I got out of grad school and it was like, okay, it's career time.
Yeah.
So that's why there's prioritization,
Yeah.
because once it was career time, I sat that down, started focusing on trying to develop this engineering career. And, I would still have ideas and I would still have thoughts. And I would have told you over a 10 to 15-year period when I wasn't actively writing, oh, I have 8 or 9 ideas for books in my mind right now.
Yeah.
And, one of my cousins tried to call me on it once, and I literally broke down like 8 book ideas. He was like, dude, why are you not writing?
Yeah.
So he's like, how do you hold all of that in your head? But I think the bug just never left me.
Yeah.
Is what I'm getting at. But
Yeah.
it just was not the time for me to prioritize it because I had to start a career. I had to not live in my grandmother's basement
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
whole life.
Yeah.
So there was a time and a place for everything, I guess, is the way that I looked at it. And like I said, I always wanted to do it, but I honestly didn't know if I'd ever come back to it,
Hmm.
because once you start that career, the career for engineering is a great path that everybody's like, you'd be a fool to not develop
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So writing would have been that dream, and the real career would have been the fallback. Well, I'm
Yeah.
already fully engaged in the fallback.
Yeah.
When am I going to have time to go dream?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's sort of what happened in that time, and the balance of transitioning back into writing sort of happened be because I think I got to a certain level of success within my career, and things developed in life that allowed me to prioritize it better.
Yeah. Well, I want to unpack that because again, I think when we connected, there were a lot of things I could see in your story, in my
Yes.
story. Um, I'm not a writer, but I like the creative outlet. Like I've
Yes.
had the creative outlets along the way. And it's interesting, I had a blog back in the blog days. I
I did
had
as well.
me and one of my homeboys, we wrote an actual sitcom because we were living in LA and people are like, you guys are
Yeah.
too funny. You should write a sitcom. And we did that. And actually, eventually through networks got connected to Kenya Barris and like we ended up saying no to moving forward because he
Right.
wasn't Kenya yet.
Right.
And we
Right.
did, we put that to side because again, the fallback plan was successful. Whereas
Yeah.
the creative passion thing, it was like, I don't know if I can do that.
Exactly.
And it's almost, it's the proverbial, you can't steal second base with your foot on first base.
Right.
And
Right.
so and again, you shared a little bit of the story of, how your wife kind of pushed you, but I'd love it if you could help us like walk through, like, how did you get your foot off of first base and realize you weren't leaving anything, but you were leaning into something that was going to kind of open you up more and have more impact creatively, the things, the ideas you said were in your head, put them on paper.
Yeah.
Like what was that transitional period like where like, some of it was kind of like what was happening around you, but there was also
Right.
things that you had to kind of say, okay, this is the time, and how you got comfortable with that.
So when I graduated from grad school, it was about 2003. It was December 2003. So probably 2000, the end of 2004, beginning of 2005, I had pretty much put the book down, with the 65 or so pages that I had written. And I didn't meet my wife until 2011.
Hmm.
So that is a bit of a gap
Mm-hmm.
between um, when I had not written anything. And I told my wife about it because, like I said, the bug was always there. It was always something that I spoke about. I like to call myself a writer, even though
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't writing. I had the blog for a little bit,
Yeah.
but I wasn't actively doing creative writing. So I would tell people I like to write, or I want to be a writer, or things like that. And I would say that to my wife naturally when we started dating. I told her things about myself. But it wasn't until about 2013 when we got engaged that I actually let her read those
Mm-hmm.
pages, because I kept it close to the vest. I
Yeah.
didn't just, no one had read it,
Yeah.
actually. Not my sister, my mom, anyone. And when I let her read it, she started glowing about it, which was shocking to me because up until this point, no one's read a story that I created. So I didn't know if I was actually good. I just knew it was something I liked doing.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife was like, I think it's good. I think you should finish this, which puts the seed in your mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it didn't make me move. And then, she would hear me talk about how I like to write to other people, because now she's my fiance and she's, we're attached at the hip. And
Yep.
when I'm
Yep.
telling these stories, she's right there along for the ride. And there's a few things that happened. One, one particular funny story, we were at a gathering, a cookout type of gathering for one of her friends, and they had some of their college friends in attendance. And it was a guy who actually wrote for some books and some shows in California. He was living in California and was in town, so he came to the cookout, and she introduced me to him. Said, "This is my fiance." No, I'm her husband at the time. This is my husband. da 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 da. And he moves on, I move on, mingling with the other people. And she's like, yeah, he used to write on such and such, and he has this many books. And my first response was, did you tell him I'm a writer? And she said, no, because you're not. which was like, ow. But it was true.
Yeah.
And my wife knows me. I actually grew up with a lot of tough love. So that wasn't like why would you talk to me like that? That was like, dang, she's right. Like, so that builds upon that little seed. Now it becomes bigger. Like, I can't keep saying this. I'm not a writer. I want to be a writer. But so around 2019, she was tired of telling me, start writing the book. My laptop had crashed on me, but by that point I was doing everything on my phone anyway, so I didn't even replace it. So I had been sitting with a dead laptop. I couldn't even start for maybe about 6 or 7 months. And I brought up, just one day we were in the house, I brought up writing again, and she said, look, if you will start writing that book to finish it, I'll buy you another laptop. Because I was making excuses. I was like, I don't even have a laptop to. Yeah. She was like, I'll buy you a laptop. So I called her bluff. And then when she actually started to go through with it, I was like, okay, no, I'm not gonna make you pay for it. So I went half. We got a little Chromebook, and I went half, something cheap, and I went half with her just to make her put her money where her mouth is. Yep. And this is about September of 2019, and as we all know, about 5 months later, the world shut down. And then it was like, you don't have anywhere to go. You don't have anything to do. You're sitting in this house. And that's when the prioritization changed. And that's when I was like, okay, you've been saying you want to do this. She's made a way. I had, in that 5-month period, I had been scanning over what I had written previously, making small little edits. Like, I spelled this wrong. But now it's like, okay, start writing. Yeah. And another thing that motivated me from her as well, this wouldn't have happened without my wife, but she started her own business the previous year. And that is just inspiring, sitting in the home, watching somebody work to start their own business and following their dream. And as dreamers motivate dreamers. Yep. So it was huge. She was huge in me getting to this point.
Well, I love it for many reasons. One, I'm a firm believer that whoever you choose to do life with sets the standard for your life. So to your point, dreamers motivating dreamers, the fact that there were those accountability moments where it wasn't, as you said, it wasn't a harsh thing. It was just like, if you're going to say this, then that comes with a certain level of responsibility that you need to back up. And obviously she saw it in you. You said, you showed her what you had written. So she knew you had it in you. Yeah. It wasn't like she sent you on some wild goose chase.
Right.
And being able to hold you accountable, but then also like being able to have that kind of that power couple dynamic of like, oh, she's out here killing it, doing something new, creative, chasing her dream. Like, how could I not? Right. Which is great. And then I also think just the kind of how the universe works on our behalf, because similar to you, I started the idea for the podcast in September of 2019, started like ideating and thinking.
Right.
And then as I'm actually building this thing, the world shuts down. And so it was like, you find yourself in these moments and times where if you've been doing the work, circumstances will present themselves to allow you to push through and to reach and get the dream. But I'd love if you could just talk a little bit about the book, like what it's about, where you are. I know you're doing a number of events right now. And just like let people know like why they should be reading it.
So the book is titled Path to Manhood. And the book is about 4 young Black men going to college at an HBCU and learning how to deal with life as adults for the first time independently. It is a coming of age story, but not the high school coming of age. It's a college coming of age. So it is a very much an adult book. I get a lot of people wondering if they should get it for their 14 or 15-year-old. And I would not advise that, because these young men are in college and they deal with very adult circumstances, such as trying to figure out their careers, trying to figure out finances, trying to figure out grown relationships for the first time, and the consequences of your actions within those relationships. trying to deal with family dynamics, a lack of fathers, um, the influence of fathers, strong-willed mothers, family members dependent on you or family's expectations of you. um, then they build a brotherhood and a bond with each other as they help to develop into the men that they want to be. And their past and their backgrounds are all different, but despite that, they find this unity and this commonality together to grow as men. And I tried my best to make it as authentic as possible, because I feel like the image of Black men in particular in college is not an image we see very often at all. So whereas the book started as me wanting to write a book that I would like to read, when I actually finished it 20 years later as a grown man who had lived a full story of my own, I had a different perspective. And a big part of that perspective is, why are our images of this not shown? Yeah. And, you can sit around and complain about what you would like to see, or you can do something about it. Yeah. So I try to, provide something to the lexicon that could add to the lack of that type of image.
Well, it's fascinating to think about how you talked about Different World and the impact it had on you at that point in your life. And it was almost like a propelling you into what was possible, which you manifested in words, which your community then held on to, helped you get there. And then now you're in a position to create an artifact that can do the same thing for people going through that young adult like time period, or even people that are into it that maybe haven't fully grasped like what does it mean and whatnot, that can again propel them in a way that, because honestly, there hasn't been another different world since then. Right. So we do need those things.
And I like to call out the fact that it's probably higher learning, school days, a different world. And more recently, we've had Grownish, but that was slightly different because it didn't necessarily always have the message that those other three had. Yeah. But outside of that, you just get Trey went to college in Atlanta at the end of Boys in the Hood. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, I absolutely. I never really put all of those pieces together. That piece of work influenced me to create possibly another piece of work that could influence the same for others. But that's definitely true.
So I want to go back to this prioritization point, because you also have a podcast, and I truly think podcast as a format is it's multi-layered beneficial, because I think for those that have ideas that are creative, it's an easy way, easy relative, to get your ideas out. I also think it's a way to connect with people that you probably would have never come across with in real life. Right. And then lastly, there's just something about this format that like you and I have never met, but we can sit down and have a conversation and connect and to learn from each other. So I think there's probably even more benefits, but I'm curious for you, why start a podcast? Why add another thing that you now have to prioritize? And really and I know yours is a bit of a different topic, but like where did the idea come from? All those things.
So the podcast in my format is very different than yours. We're not in the interview type of podcasting. We are more of an opinion-based podcast, but the podcast stemmed from probably around 2015. I sort of took interest in a lot of podcasts, and I started feeling like I'm a very opinionated brother. I could share my opinions on things, but I didn't want to do it alone. So, I would much rather have those discussions with people to talk about topics. So I started to ask friends about doing podcasts, and nobody was really interested. So, I sort of let it go. And it was more of that needing a creative outlet, just like the blog and the book ideas that were in my mind. But I guess when the pandemic hit, because we started in 2020, a group chat where we discuss comic book movies, me being a comic book fan that I am, where we discuss comic book movies constantly and other Black movies constantly, turned into a discussion when someone else said, man, we should have a podcast. And I said, I've been telling y'all for years we could have done a podcast. What are you talking about? So then that sort of, once somebody else got the bug, then it sort of got the ball rolling. And it ended up being, to start, it was 6 of us. There are 5 of us now. But to start, there were 6 of us. Actually, there were 7, but the 7th person never made it to the first recording. Yeah. but yeah, so we talk about, movies and entertainment that we try to give the Black male opinion, because we're all guys. We would love to have women on as well, but we don't have a woman member as in the core group. But yeah, we just give our opinions about the movies and shows and other things within entertainment, but mostly movies and shows. And we give our opinions and the different perspectives. And trust me, even though we're all 5 Black men, we definitely have different perspectives. So you'd be amazed how many times we get on there and like one person hated it, one person loved it, and then one person's okay, and then it turns into this debate. And so that for me has just been more fun. It is a love of discussion and a love of debate and a love of just expressing my opinion that I am able to get out with that venture.
Yeah. So I want to reflect on your story a little bit, and I guess the question would be, what has success meant to you in your journey, and how has that maybe changed as you've gone through your journey?
So that is for me being so diverse in my interests. That is, there's so many answers to that question as far as what success means to me. I would have told you probably when I was 16, just because I was a weirdo, that success would be being a father. And then that didn't happen until I was 35. So I would have told you when I started my career that success in the engineering field would have been moving into management, which is something I thought would happen after I'd been in my career for a couple of decades. And that actually happened years earlier than I thought it would. I would have definitely told you that publishing a book would mean success to me. And that occurred this year. But as you reach your goals then have to change. I want my children to be happy, healthy, and successful, and me to find ways to nurture and motivate them into success in their lives. And that's a goal. In my career, I want to have a career that provides for me and my family, that sustains our lifestyle, but does not take away from my ability to take part with my family and take advantage of my creativity. So that is been a struggle in the last year because the job has gotten very hectic, and those things happen. So you just got to prioritize how you have to prioritize. Now with the podcast, it's more an outlet for fun. So I don't really necessarily have true goals that I place on it. I don't put a lot of weight on it. I would love for successful things to happen with the podcast. And I think we actually have a pretty fun product. We get a little wild and crazy at times, but I think it's something that's good and fun to laugh at and listen to and enjoy the debate. But I don't put the weight on that, just because it really still feels like just a true hobby. And for the books, that is probably where I have some of my more lofty goals now that I'm back into that mindset of writing. That has definitely become something that's very important with me. And I've published my first one in June of 2024. I hope to publish the sequel to that one in the near future. I'm working on that, work in progress. And I hope to publish many, many more. My goal is to never stop doing the author and the writing and that creative work, because if for nothing else, it is very therapeutic for me. I feel like it it is very mentally healing and releasing for me. And I just love that creative world. And
Yeah.
so my intent is to maintain writing novels, fiction novels, for as long as I can.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because as you talked about the different vectors of success, what's good about that is if one of those is like, let's say not at the top, it still balances you out. It's like, you have a bad day at work, you still have the family side, you still got the podcast with your boys, you still got the book, you still got the writing.
Right.
And I think we can sometimes, you almost like identify yourself with your career so that when it's high, it's great.
Right.
But when it's not high, which a lot of us that have been working on notice, like there's always going to be peaks and valleys.
Right.
That you take that as a hit on who you are. When a lot of times it has nothing to do with who you are. It's just
Right.
state of the business. And so having those other things to balance you out, I think is really important. To your point, it becomes therapeutic in that I'm not tying all of my value to one thing, so that when that one thing isn't going well, it pulls me down, which is really important. So what would you say has been a mama we made it, or another way said, greatest achievement for you so far?
The first thing that comes to mind when you say "Mama, we made it" was when I got my job with as an engineer. My first position as an engineer. The day I got hired, I made slightly more than my mother made in her career as a postal worker.
Wow.
And when I told her what my salary was going to be, that's the first thing she said. She said, "You make more than me." So that definitely felt like a "Mama, we made it" moment.
Yeah.
Now, still with my mom's reaction when I published my book and was able to send my mother her copy of the book, she was so ecstatic for me. She was so happy for me. And every time I tell her something's happening, every time I say, I think I might be on a podcast, or I might be having an author talk, or I might get invited to this vendor event there, I can tell my book, she is so ecstatic. And I think that stems from her remembering me at 23 saying, yeah, I want to write a book one day, or I want to be an author. And, my mother grew up in a generation where you go get your good job, you work your 30 years, you get your pension. And that's what success is. And that's what she did. And because of that, that's what she taught me. But now she sees me venturing away from that and not having the fear of venturing away from that and still having success in my career. And I think it's probably somewhat inspiring for her. So that's another "Mama, we made it" moment for me as well.
No, that's beautiful. I think that, just that idea of, we know this as parents now, of being able to see your child in their zen, in their moment, doing the thing that we know lights them up. Like that's all you want. At the end of the day, yes, the accolades are great. Yes, the success, the money's great, but just being able to know, like, okay, I did enough to get you to that point where you could be in that moment, is really great. On the flip side, what has been your biggest mistake or your biggest challenge in your journey?
My biggest mistake has been not writing for 15 years. When I put that book down, I kept having urges to write, but didn't do it. I kept having the want to open it up and just read what I wrote, and would make excuses, wouldn't do it. And I kept having ideas for different books and just wasn't putting fingers to the keys or pen to paper, or however you want to say it. And then when I finally got back to writing in 2020, 15 years later, as I wrote this book, I realized some of those ideas for books that I had. I had an idea, this would, if I, had a character who went through this in their lives and this situation arose, that would be a good idea for a book. That turned into chapter 14, 15, and 16. Or this character that I had an idea for another book was a through line throughout the entire book. And what I realized was the entire time I was writing the book.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know it.
Yeah.
Like, unbeknownst to myself, I was still writing the book in that 15-year period with all those
Wow.
book ideas. And it didn't dawn on me until I was writing that, physically putting my fingers to the keys and trying to come up with them. Like, oh, you know what? Okay, let me put that right here.
Yeah.
And so I, that my biggest, mistake and regret in this process is I should have never stopped.
Yeah.
I could have been 3 books in by now,
Yeah.
if even if it was just with these characters.
How much of that do you think was self-imposed? Like how much of that do you think, again, I go back to we only know what people have told us, and previous generations tell you the best they can because most times they haven't sat in the rooms we've sat in. And
Right.
so their idea of like get a good job, ride it till the wheels fall off is kind of the
Absolutely.
guidance we get. And it's like that's why you go to
Absolutely.
school. So I'm curious if like what caused you not to write for 15 years?
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head. My mother went to college and didn't finish.
Hmm.
My father went to college, didn't finish. Um, I went to college, graduated. None of my grandparents went to college. I have one aunt that graduated college.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like the second person in the family, first of my generation. So me and my cousins to graduate college. So that's success.
Yep.
Then I got a job. That's success. Then, we've always known you were going to be an engineer. So work hard at that. And then, even though the idea sort of started with me, emanated into my community, and they pushed me and galvanized me into it, then it became, well, I can't stop doing this.
Yeah.
I can't let that down. I can't fail at this.
Yeah.
So that needs to be the focus. So it was very much self-imposed, just because you get that pressure from the, like I said, the 30 years in a pension, although there were no pensions for us. There was 401ks.
Yeah.
So it was very much, and there's no blame or no fault in anybody in that, but it was definitely something that was self-imposed. Because, like I said, I still found outlets at times. I had a blog for a couple of years and things like that. But I could have done so much more in this creative space by this point had I not imposed that on myself.
But the good thing is that it didn't. We're not at the end of the story, and it's not like it never happened. So the good news is that it did. You did hit a point where it's like, okay, we're doing this, and then you were able to actually see the benefit of doing it. And to your point of prioritization, seeing that you can do juggling, prioritization, focus here, focus there.
Although it took some figuring out.
As
you know, with kids,
yes,
you got to figure out that time prioritization. So
exactly.
They would go to bed, and once they went to bed, I had to figure out my quiet space and get writers will tell you got to find what sets the mood properly for you. So once I figured that out, then I could get into that rhythm. And once you get going, it sort of just starts flowing out. So.
That's beautiful. So if somebody was inspired by your journey, somebody saw what you were able to do, and they're like, you know what, I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna I'm not gonna be beholden to this, like get a good grades, go to school, get a good job, and write it out. Or just in general wanted to be a writer, they're inspired. What would be your last words of advice to them?
Don't get in your own way, because I think 90% of it is what you mentally think you can do. Just like you're creative enough to come up with these stories, you're creative enough to create ways to talk yourself out of doing it. And you have to figure out a way to surpass what the world tells you is the right way to go. And that's not to say you don't still conduct that business. I'm a perfect example of that. But it is a way of telling yourself in that same creative fashion that I can create a way that I can have this avenue to get this creativity out and to fulfill myself in that way. Because there is something fulfilling about it, about being able to reach for your dreams. And, success is different for everyone. People publish a book and never promote it, but they're happy that I just published a book. And that's perfectly fine. But you just have to, you can't talk yourself out of it. You can't think yourself out of it. And don't let your creativity create ways to stop you from expressing yourself. Use that same creativity to find ways to make things happen. Now, the bad part of my example is I probably don't sleep nearly as much as I should, but that I had bad sleeping habits before anyway, so I just took advantage of those bad habits and put myself to work.
If you want to hear more stories like this one, just search for What's Your Story with Matt Story wherever you listen to podcasts. Click the follow so you don't miss out on any of our future episodes. And please leave a rating and a comment so others can find the pod as well. And lastly, if you want to follow me and see what I'm up to, just go to LinkedIn and search for Matt Story.